Hey guys, LevelCap here, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Gaming. The latest Tides of War chapter, Trial by Fire, is now live. This week's challenges and many of the weeks to come require, or rather give you the option to play Firestorm to complete them as well. The good news is Firestorm has gone over quite well with players. Overall, it's a pretty solid addition to the game. Of course, players do have their concerns. The current looting system is pretty bad, and it can be quite challenging to pick up your desired loot from dead players, as most items overlapped when they're on the ground. This is a top priority for DICE and will likely be addressed in the game's next update, or future update as they called it. Based on footage released by the devs, it looks like loot will no longer overlap when dropped by dead players. The result is still a bit messy, especially indoors, but it is an improvement from the current loot system. This is just the first step in a bigger improvement to the system. And what's nice is we can actually expect an update as early as next week with changes to the loot system, other tweaks to Firestorm, and some multiplayer updates. Long-term players can expect extensive changes to Firestorm's loot mechanics. We also have a potential release date for the game's next map, Mercury. Unfortunately, it might be May 30th. The current Tides of War progression has Operation Mercury starting on the 30th in the game's menu. Whether this is the actual release date for the map or not is unclear, but hopefully we won't have to wait that long for the game's next base map. Finally, DICE put out a new player survey for the month of March. One of the questions asks players to rate how important the rental server program is to them. In past Battlefield titles, players could buy custom servers to host public matches on them. This feature is absent from Battlefield 5. We know DICE recently had a meeting regarding RSP, and more details should be announced soon. We'll see if the feedback from this survey convinces them that it is a high priority item. DICE has been playing around with doing custom match rotations, like the recent one that focused on armor and air maps, which was quite popular, but then they take it away. So an RSP system would ensure that players could just kind of ensure what kind of map rotations and game mode rotations they wanted in the long run. Speculation on Anthem's subreddit regarding the use of AI to drive microtransaction sales sent players into a tailspin. Last year, a supposed official document regarding EA's use of AI in their games to create profiles of players leaked online. It made some very bold claims, like being able to tell if a player was depressed or not, and that depressed players buy more microtransactions. Eventually, it was revealed, at least in part, to be an elaborate hoax started on 4chan. It suggested EA would do things like manipulate a game's difficulty and loot drop rates as players progressed to make microtransactions more appealing. In reality, most developers do closely monitor player data and tailor the monetization of their games to maximize profits. But it's incredibly unlikely that a game like Anthem would use that data to affect the gameplay experience. If it did, players would figure out pretty quickly. The latest patch for Anthem removed the loading screen for entering the Forge. They also tweaked the game's loot and added a new endgame mode. Every day, a story mission is randomly selected and made available in a high difficulty mode called Legendary Missions. They also added proper FOV sliders that control different perspectives like flying, ADSing, and more independently. Borderlands 3 has been revealed. Gearbox released the trailer for the game during their PAX East presentation. It has 4 new playable characters, several returning characters from the last game, 2 new villains, expanded vehicles and location variety, over 1 billion guns, and of course, Claptrap. The trailer didn't give us a release date, but we can expect more info tomorrow. Gearbox also revealed remasters for all the previous Borderlands titles coming to all platforms. Basically, if you own a Borderlands game, expect to get a free copy of the remastered version of it, complete with all its DLC, tomorrow. Borderlands 2 VR is also getting the game's entire DLC added in a free update this summer. The VR game launched last year and only offered the base game. EA is laying off 350 employees from their marketing, publishing, and operations divisions. While they didn't give a clear reason for the layoffs, they follow similar cuts from other major publishers like Activision and ArenaNet. Despite Battlefield 5 selling 1 million copies short of its first quarter sales goal, EA still pulled in $1.3 billion in their last quarter. The upcoming Wolfenstein co-op shooter Youngblood finally has a release date. The game releases on July 26 for PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Nintendo Switch. It follows BJ's twin daughters in Paris. People that purchase the deluxe edition can play with a friend that doesn't own the game via a buddy pass system. Any progress earned while playing with the buddy pass will carry over if you end up buying the game yourself. Metro Exodus got a big update that adds New Game Plus, letting players replay the game with a variety of new options. You can choose to play with all of your previously unlocked weapons available from the start, just one weapon slot, a crossbow, and even disable backpack crafting. Enemies can be made tougher. The game's weather and time of day can be set to real time instead of 2 hours, and much more. Overall, it's a pretty big addition to Exodus that adds a ton of replayability. The update also includes a ton of bug fixes and platform-specific improvements. This year's E3 will be the most important ever for CD Projekt Red, the developers of the upcoming sci-fi FPS Cyberpunk 2077. The game is hotly anticipated but doesn't have a firm release date yet. The devs confirmed they plan to release 2 games before 2021, Cyberpunk and a second unannounced game. It's likely they'll announce a release date for Cyberpunk and tease their next game during their E3 presentation. The BAREBONES playlist for Black Ops 4 is now live on PS4. It removes specialist abilities, making the gameplay much more like older Call of Duty titles. Black Ops 4 has been a mixed bag for players. While it did scale back the pure insanity of more recent titles, the specialist abilities induced enough craziness to take away from the core gameplay. Hopefully the BAREBONES playlist is a permanent addition to the game. A big update for The Division 2 is coming on April 5th. It adds World Tier 5 and the Black Tusk Stronghold. Basically, expect an even harder endgame mode to play. The content in this update will be free for all players. The hardcore World War II FPS Hell Let Loose finally has an official release date. It was successfully backed on Kickstarter last year and will be coming to Steam Early Access on June 6th. Backers have had access to alphas and betas for a few months now. The Early Access launch will include multiple modes and maps, including a 50 vs 50 player mode. Star Citizen's 3.5 alpha update is rolling out this weekend and adds playable female character models for the first time since the game's public launch. It also adds a ton of new content. Players will be able to explore the City Planet ArcCorp. A new gravitational flight system will add another layer of depth to piloting. The face-over IP and voice-over IP features are getting some improvements as well. AI bounty hunters will pursue players with high crime stats. There's a ton more being added, so be sure to check out the update announcement linked below. Ring of Elysium's player count fell through the floor following the release of Apex Legends. Elysium is a free-to-play battle royale game that is similar to PUBG, but a bit more arcadey. Players can use items like BMX bikes and snowboards to get around the map quickly. In December, the game's peak player count was nearly 64,000, but following Apex's release in February, it is now sitting at 23,000 peak players. That's still pretty respectable, but for a free-to-play battle royale title, it is concerning. Don't expect support for the game to drop anytime soon, but it'll be interesting to see how the developers react. CSGO players got a surprising update this week that removed the map Cache, a staple of the game's competitive scene for years, from the game's active duty map pool. It's been replaced by a reworked version of VERTIGO. That rework has been in development for the past few months, but its core design has remained mostly the same. It's a multi-level map set atop an unfinished skyscraper. Fundamentally, it's designed very differently from the game's more popular maps. Because of this, it's been relatively unpopular over the years, especially with competitive players. Being in the active duty map pool means it'll appear in professional tournaments soon, though it is unlikely it'll see much action. Pro CS teams take months or even years to develop effective teamwork on new maps. New or reworked maps rarely see much competitive play until teams feel comfortable on them. Valve recently pulled another competitive map, Cobble, out of the active duty pool as well. Both it and Cache are expected to get full overhauls this year. Stalker 2 might actually be happening. It was initially revealed in May of last year, but reports suggest the announcement was just a bid to attract publishers and no work had actually been done on the game yet. The release date back then was listed as 2021, and the game's website was updated this week with a new piece of key art and music track. It's still scheduled for a 2021 release according to the site. This is the first time we've seen any updates regarding Stalker 2 since the initial announcement. Considering Metro Exodus's success and how closely it resembles what a modern Stalker game would look like, it's clear that there's a market for the Stalker franchise. Whether it can actually compete with the production quality of a Metro Exodus title is another question. Amazon Prime memberships now include 12 months of Nintendo Switch Online service. Customers with Prime can log in with their Twitch account to claim the offer. The offer is valid until September 24th. Switch Online typically costs $20 a year. It gives you access to a selection of classic NES titles and cloud backups. And that wraps it up for today's episode of This Week in Gaming. As always, guys, thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought was the most interesting story in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.